I was wearing a T-shirt marked "They Came Before Columbus," and he saw me as I entered the building, and he said, "Come here, youth. Where you get that shirt from?" And he said, "Boy, where you get that shirt from?" I didn't like it, and he said, "Follow me." And I went in his office downstairs, and there was a poster on it marked "They Came Before Columbus." So he said, "What are your connections to this?" I said, "I'm from Jamaica, and I'm the treasurer for the African Liberation Day Committee in Jamaica, which celebrate African Liberation Day every year for the last 12 or 13 years I was living in Kingston." So immediately we click, and immediately everything is in the office. I could relate to his books on the shelf, his black, green, and gold flag, a banner, everything was on the wall. And we just start chat, and I could just quote him. And then he started to introduce me to who he was, and he said, "You want to see something else?" And I said, "What was it?" And he took me next door to his bookshop, which was in the committee next door. And we had a good chat, but I didn't like his mannerism, or he just styled me as a boy, as an elder. I was expecting him to approach me better, but after I got to know him, that's his style. And it was a good discussion I had with him. And then we just parted company, and then I met Al a couple of weeks after. He was handing out some flyers about a function to be held in this building. And when I came, it was Dr. Ben, Dr. Ben Jokanan, who I'm a student of. And I got the wrath of Dr. Ben as well as Mr. Edwards, but from there, that's how we started to click. And he asked me to come here to see him one day. And I came, and we started just to talk about Africa. And I realized that we had so much in common. And over the last number of years, up to the time when he passed on to the ancestral land, we had some very good discussion. He's a man I had respected. He's a man who I take on a personal responsibility to carry his work through as a historian, as an activist, and as somebody who have done so much for this community. But it has been lost even before he passed on. I think, those people who tried to align themselves with him probably were seen as some weirdo. So that's how I met him, Yeah. The first thing I want to mention about Berry and his African connection is that he made it very clear that he was a Guyanese by birth and by nationality, but he was an African man, and he subscribed to the notion that as long as you're a black man, phenotypic, there's no question about you're an African. And he would run jokes about people talking about they're Jamaicans and all that kind of stuff. But he was very clear on being an African, and that was one of the things that I remembered him most about for. So in terms of the Pan-African Congress movement, when we first met, I knew about the Pan-African Congress movement because I was part of a trade union in Jamaica, which they had a committee, some guys who I knew very well. Even when I was coming to Manchester, they told me to look out for this man because his wife was living here and he was a staunch Pan-Africanist. He still have his children live here and grandchildren. He passed on this last year, 94. So he had taught me first about the Pan-African Congress, and Berry was quite well known by a Jamaican pilot, Francis. He was a staunch Pan-Africanist. The only other house I've ever seen as Pilot Francis is Mrs. Edwards and Mr. Edwards' house. So they had that connection with a museum of Pan-African education in it. So when I realized that he was aligned to the movement here, I began to tell him my connection, firstly with the African Liberation Day Committee, starting about 1989-90 when I moved from St. Elizabeth to Kingston, and I attended my first ALD and asked who were the people responsible for it, and immediately I became a part of the committee, and then I aligned myself with the trade union who was part of the international movement at the Pan-African Congress. So I knew about the PACM here, but I didn't know of any name, and when I was coming I didn't get to find out my brothers and sisters who knew about them. But there was a sister named Gerline Bean who knew Berry very well. She was the assistant secretary of the African Liberation Day Committee in Jamaica. And when she heard I was in Manchester, she said, I must look out for Elder Berry. And by that time, I didn't meet him yet. So when I met him and I told him about Gerline was one of the persons who went to Tanzania through the Pan-African Congress movement to teach, because that was one of the big part of the Pan-African movement here in the UK for many, many years through the African liberation struggle. So Berry gave me a lot of information about people. There was another lady named Nzinga Garden who was a nurse, people who I knew back home, who were forefront in the struggle, not only here marching, but they left the 9-to-5 job and they went to Africa, to Tanzania. Some of them went all over the place as nurses, teachers, social workers. Then he told me about the educational program, which we couldn't afford it in Jamaica because we didn't have a type of fund and organizational structure to invite speakers. But what we did, whenever we knew that international speakers were passing through the University of the West Indies or the Seabed Authority who were from Africa, we would try and get them to come and have talk. But when he told me what they were doing here as a movement, it was a whole university by itself. And it gave me a further insight that he was giving a type of education to a community here. We're back in Jamaica. It's premium, we have to pay for it. And I said, you have these things here so often. And most of them were free. And some of them, even if the money they had to pay, it was very small. And he called out quite a few names to me. And many of the names I could recognize him, and he said, you have met these people. So I began to ask him questions, what were these people like? And he told me that through the movement itself, most of these people, they were very humble, very knowledgeable, willing to share their life experience, and more so, they were willing to work as activists with people. And he always called me a young man, or sometimes he would say boy, which I didn't get to on because I was new in the country. The other thing which I learned about the Pan-African movement was Africa Liberation Day, the scale to which it was held here. It makes the one in Jamaica look like picnic, whereby they were able to attract. The first thing, the level of publicity, which goes on for weeks, months, then attracting the type of speakers, then it runs for 2 days, almost for the whole day, and all kind of activities that they went there, and the fact that it had moved around the country. And in Jamaica, we're only able to have it in Kingston, but we move it around different parts of Kingston. And then he said to me, one of the other big feature outside of the work that they have been doing, Kwanzaa. Then I said, I know about Kwanzaa. So he said, look like you're at the right place. And he told me that there was a Kwanzaa. So my first Kwanzaa, run by the PACM, was in this building. And I actually happened to, back in Jamaica, we only did the ceremonial part of it. We didn't do the cultural aspect because we didn't have the type of money to attract the people who were cultural artists. And but the rituals and the food sharing and all that kind of stuff, we were able to do that. And we started out doing it at people's house before we moved into the community center. And he told me here it started as a community center and the Pan-African Congress movement to have it right across the country. The 7th day, in fact, he told me, were celebrated, and it's held in big community halls and so on. He tried to get me to the first one out of Manchester, but I was trying to know England. So the first one he invited me, I said I want to see what London was like on a New Year's. So I went to London because it was my first New Year here. And I went to London, then I came back and I asked him how it was, and he said, I missed something, boy. But I said, I will be the next one to come. The other thing I learned a lot about him from the PACM was the whole aspect of educating people through small study groups. And when I first came to Dr. Ben here, I didn't know that a study group exists. I thought it was just part of the wider branch having a lecture. And the study group was one of probably the best thing happened to me when I came here, because all I would do would go to lectures, library, go to the student quarters, because I'm not into pub, I wasn't into church, I'm not into football. I was just focused on trying to understand people. And interestingly, when I came to Manchester, and every black person I saw, and I asked them for where the black people congregate, where the political black people are, they look at me as some weirdo. Everybody said, don't go to Mossad. And I said, why? Nobody wouldn't tell me. And I went to one of the guy who was a lecturer, quite radical in the university. I said, every black person I meet said, don't go to Mossad. And he said to me, don't believe them. Nothing wrong with Mossad. And he said, I'm not going to tell you when to go, but you should make sure you go to Mossad. And Richard Davis was the first person I met. They had a Windrush exhibition in the town hall. And as I move around the exhibition, I said to the people, where are the black people? They said, do not go to Mossad. And Richard Davis, I'll never forget him. He asked me, why do you want to meet black people? I said, I'm a black man, I'm an African, and I'm from Jamaica. But I need to find our people in the city. They must live here. They must exist. And he said, why? And I said, I want to find the people. And he said, don't move. And you remember them big cellular phone, he took up one, and he hold it, and he dial it. And he asked him what my name, and I told him, and he said, there's somebody at the end of the line want to speak to you. And I said, who is it? And he said, he's the secretary for Jamaica Society. Spoke to the person, gave me her name, said they meet 5:30 at West Indian Center, and I should come to the meeting this Sunday. That was Friday. The whole Sunday evening, I've been moving up and down Oxford Road, can't find West Indian Center. Everybody I asked them said it's in Mossad, do not go there. Do not go there. And I decided to ring the number that they gave me, and I rang it. It was Mr. Edwards who answered the telephone number, and he said I should walk down, look, and I see a telephone box and a garage, and turn there and I'll see the West Indian Center. And I came inside, and they were meeting in the room downstairs. I didn't know him. Pushed the door, and he said, you're the chap who rang. And I said, oh, said Jamaican people upstairs. Go on upstairs to them. And I feel offended. Anyway, I reminded him about it, and he said, you remember me? And that was something when he told me about, coming here and trying to find black people, and I got that run around, and he said, it's just because the community is like, I came the wrong time. Because if it was days gone by, and if black people are out, they would signpost me here, or they would send me to Westwood Street. But times have changed. I think that when I came in the late 1980s, the community was kind of changing. There was a big change take place, and Berry himself was even trying to get people back to some sense of community of what it was like for people. So all of that, I think it came through the Pan-African Congress movement. And this center today holds as a testament of what the Pan-African Congress movement has been doing across the world. There are some people, quote unquote, who are part of this group who manage this building, don't want to hear anything about it, but they need to be educated. And further, some of them are also hiding from being African or want to be linked with the continent, because all them think about is slavery and backwardness. But Berry stood against that notion, and that's why he will also be remembered for his public education in Manchester through the PACM. And that takes me through now to the Saturday school. When I came here, and I heard in the Jamaica Society that there's a Saturday school being held here, I said, Saturday school? I said, why a Saturday school? I said, back in Jamaica, man, I go to school 3 times a day. I go to my regular school. After my regular school, there's a Jamal school. where for people who can't read and write, but if you're a youngster, you can behave yourself, you go in there, you learn again. And then the teacher next door, every teacher that come into your group, keep a school. So I said, Saturday school, we said we go to school every day. All after church, we go to school. And him say, so I asked the lady why they have a Saturday school. School's supposed to keep every day. So she said to me, there are some problems in the community. And this organization has been running a Saturday school for many years. And the man who I need to talk to is Mr. Edwards. I said, who's Mr. Edwards? He said, you can't miss him. He's this big black man downstairs. But I said, why this big black man? And she said to me, you can't miss him. He's bigger than everybody else. So I went down there and I said to him, that time we didn't meet formally before he saw the shirt. I said to him, I understand there's a Saturday school. And he said, yes, there's a Saturday school, but it's kind of in a phase at the moment. And as soon as it starts going again, you will hear about it. And the Saturday school was kind of getting low around that time. And it picks up back around 1990, I think, but very low keyed, and they just had enough teachers who could deal with the number of children. And then I think it stopped, 92, and when it stopped 1992, I by then knew Barry, I knew Al, and I knew a few other people, and I've always said whenever it start back, Mr. Edwards, I am interested in running with it. And then and there he started to tell me his whole idea of more than a Saturday school. His whole vision was to have a college in this building. And just before he passed on, because he knew of my interest to run a college here, he had already, it must be something that he was discussing many years ago about running a college here, and he was working with Mancat to run a college. And so he went and he rehashed the plans with Mancat, and things were getting, and he called me one evening and said, Washi, the college is going to happen. And I said, how you mean? He said, yes, there's a meeting and you and I are going to go to Mancat and we're going to sort out the college at Carmore Road. And I said, Elderberry, you mean we're going to have a school at Carmore Road? I mean proper college? And he said, yes, Mancat, because I knew about Mancat then. And he said, yeah, Mancat is going to provide the resources. What he needs to get is to get the teachers and the student. And I said, man, we will get them, because by then I'm getting to know Manchester, and I'm saying, if Mancat is behind this, there's no way we wouldn't have a college. And the meeting fell through, and another meeting was held, and I couldn't go, but he updated me on what was happening. And sadly after, Barry said he was going for holiday, went for holiday, just didn't return alive. So the college didn't happen. But because I knew of a Saturday school, I've always said to Al and all the other brethren at the study group, this thing is going to start. And there's a past chairman, Mr. Smith, who presently teaches at this school. He taught at the Saturday school previously for many years. And he came by one night and said, what about restarting the school? Because he was helping our children, and they were telling me that he needs to meet me. I never met the man. I don't know who he was. And every night when I came on Saturday night, I heard the man just left. He was driving at the time. And he and I probably passed shoulder to shoulder. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. And somewhere around July 2005 we met. And when he told me what had happened here many years ago, I said, we're going to start a school. We have teachers. We don't have any students. We're going to start a school. And I mobilized the few teachers who were among us in the study group. And we said, we're going to start the Saturday school. And we restarted the Saturday school, not even showing where children. We said the first thing we need to have is teachers and what we're going to teach. And by just looking at where Barry was coming from, we said, okay, once we have the teachers, we can always get the students. And we begin by asking, like Al and a few others who have children at primary and secondary school age. So we actually restarted the Saturday school with more teachers than students. And ironic, as I speak, we now have to be turning away students. We can't get teachers. We have more teachers. So in terms of one of his great legacy, in terms of providing supplemental education in England, based on what has happened with Bernard Core groundbreaking work, when we were seen as black people as being subnormal, meaning we were not as good as Caucasian to be educated, a part of the miseducation again. When Berry began to work on supplemental education, it is something that is dear to me, because I come from a background where the last thing you want to hear is if you don't do anything else, you must go to school. And school does not mean only mainstream. It's everything that you can learn. And that's one of the hallmark of Mr. Edwards' work, whereby school was beyond the confines of the primary and secondary school, the four walls. And that's why so much emphasis, I think, was placed on community education right across the Pan-African Congress movement and even in Manchester here. So his work through the Saturday school, I spoke to quite a few people who had worked with him, like Diane Watt, Norma Brown, who they were some of the early teachers, and as black trainees who have worked with him. And I've heard a lot of stories, the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And I have tried very hard myself to find documents in the center relating to the Saturday school. And one of the good thing about the present day Saturday school, some of Mr. Edwards' dream and some of the past teachers, some things that they would have loved to be done to that Saturday school had never happened, is happening now. Like we have proper structures in place. We have one of the things I saw in a report when they were having some difficulty, where Mr. Edwards was insisting that, we are not a mainstream school, but we must have some structures in terms of having proper curriculum so we can see how people are learning and what we need to teach. I think the minutes of the meeting said half of the teachers said them not doing it, and them leave Mr. Edwards in a lurch. And the school, it was just going AY, but he said it needed to happen. And today we get all of those things right. We get the balance of, we're keeping it, we're getting sticks for it, keeping it right, that it only has to be an African. We're not talking about a Jamaican or a Somalian or a Ghanaian or a Barbadian school. We're talking about an African Caribbean school, and we emphasize African. And today, the school, 90% of it, since we started the last 8 years, is largely children who are from the continent, and most of them were born on the continent. And the parents, some of them are not very vocal when they hear why we are not accepting European or white students, but some of them have opened up very clearly and honestly that they think, this is the right place. I remember we had a staff meeting, and there is a parent who migrated with his children from London. We're having difficulty in settling in London, and somebody told him about the school. And he said openly, they have just started a few months, but there's marked difference, not only in their behavior, but having just come around us and the academics. And this year, I think they are here for the second year. And one is doing the twins, the twins I teach Al. One is doing much better than the other, but they are settling. And quite a few others, a little bit still asking the question. And one of them came out quite frankly at one staff parents meeting and asked why we don't have white teachers, and we explained the reason. He understood properly, and he could see the need why we have to have these. And I'm proud to say that Mr. Edwards got stick for it. And while I haven't gotten any stick, people have approached me who are opposed to him and say it up front to me, Wash, look at this building. You're struggling to get finances for the Saturday school. Just take the white children. Everything will fall in place. And I said, it's not going to happen while I and the team of people here are running it. So we are working, and we are keeping that as best as possible. We are also using the best of what we think as African people can rival the best of technology to give the best education. We don't have computers, and the teachers, when we restarted, we took the decision that we were going to use a chalk and talk approach and giving the best of what is there that we have experienced through computers and whiteboards and all the flashiness. We can do it here without it. It's not that we're against it, but we are saying that being supplemental, we have to show what we're delivering differently. And one of the areas that we probably have not been able to grasp the best we would like is to deliver the African-centered education in terms of our history and culture. It's an area that we have been trying to, as you would know, we call embedded learning we are using, but would like to have it as a separate part of the curriculum where it's not only for children but for parents and children. But we face the dilemma of having to wrestle with Christianity and Christian beliefs, and the children and the parents who come here is a voluntary thing, and we don't want to lose them, and we have to show tolerance to people's will and people's aspiration. But at some point in time, we will be doing that, and I guess those who probably will feel uncomfortable with it, it is our task and our challenge, because Mr. Edwards always said leadership is about pain, and we shouldn't run away from struggle. And that is going to be a struggle as part of the Saturday school. So I would like to conclude about the Saturday school in saying that Mr. Edwards' work in terms of marshalling Saturday school in England since 1967-68 is a testament of a man who work with people and understand that if we don't do it ourselves, nobody not going to be doing it for us. We were so pleased in 2007. We went to a conference, an international conference, a Saturday school in London, and the main speaker mentioned that, he understand that Saturday school in England started somewhere in Manchester, and somebody needs to find and do the research so it can be properly documented. And, when he was informed that people from Manchester were at the conference, he said, he needs to come up at some point in time to look at the records to see where it is going. And the city council, as much as it may be and what they had with Mr. Edwards, they are still making the point that the oldest Saturday school in Manchester, which is right, is a Polish Saturday school. But they are not saying that the oldest African or Afro-Caribbean Saturday school in England started in this building here under the leadership of Barry Edwards. And it's a sore point in the city council. They just retired head of supplemental education. He was telling some of his colleagues, a meeting I had with them, and they thought it was a Polish. They didn't even know that Carmore Road existed because of the politics and the agenda which comes around as it goes. So Mr. Edwards' work in terms of supplemental education needs to be underscored in no uncertain terms, and it is something which I am hoping that when I am no longer able to continue, others will see the value of it and the contribution and the vision of those who say that Saturday school was important for our community. When, 68 and now is almost 40 odd years. And it lives on, and people still remember Carmore Road for the Saturday school. And I think Mr. Edwards is always synonymous with Saturday school. There is an argument, or there is a issue concerning, did it start in the old school here, or did it start in Mosside at, I think, St. Mary's Church? I'm not sure where that was. But whichever way it was, there are some people who I've spoken to have good recollection that they can all remember that even before he was driving, he had children on the bus, taking them to Saturday school. And his family needs to be aware of some of this, which some of them don't know. I mean, like his extended family. And I'm hoping that the history will be written and get into mainstream so that people can see that this is another significant contribution of a migrant who came into England. WIOCC, which I am presently the chairman for, is an organization which, when I first started to come inside this building, mainly through the Jamaica Society, which is one of the affiliate organizations. The others are Trinidad Association, Barbados Overseas Association, Grenada Overseas Association, the St. Kitts and Nevis People Association, and the Guyanese Association. Those are the umbrella organization which forms the WIOCC, the West Indian Organization Coordinating Committee. There's a history behind even this name, which people at one time, I remember Al and I had a good laugh, they were thinking about changing the logo because they thought the C was just a C. But they didn't realize that it's a deep meaning behind it. And it's not just something that's plucked out of a hat. If you understand the political struggle of England, a lot of some of the things that were being replicated here through the black political parties, early 1960, they took the political aspiration from the deep south of America. And that C represents something about communities of black people coming together. I don't know how many people are aware of that. They just see it because they see we're coordinating committees, but the coordinating committee is deeply rooted in the people's struggle in the South of America, black people. But if we begin to tell our Mancunian that, they think you come from Mars. And if you begin to educate them about that, they even think that you're just trying to propagate something which is not written down, which is very sad. So that coordinating committee, the belly of it, is coming through the struggles of African people. Them call themselves African American. They mean nothing. It's through the African people galvanizing struggle against domination from Europeans. And when the BFU, the British United Political Front, in Britain in 1962 decided that we're going to copy some of the vision and run it through this country, the whole thing of the coordinating committee concept was how they were building their struggles across Manchester and across England. So the belly of the WIOCC, the name of it comes out of that, and that is a historical fact. There may not be anything written down that I have seen, but talking to people and people who have worked with people like Ron Phillips, who was a stalwart in this community. We have a plaque in this hall, this building about him. And people who have worked with the BFU knows something about that. But what has frightened our people here, the WIOCC, is the politics. Politics meaning they think that you're going to rival the Labour Party or the Conservative, or you're coming to talk that you're Africans. They are not too keen on that. It's nice to hear that in the private bedroom, but once you're in a group outside, it frightens them. They are everything anti-political. And the IIOCC started out as a political organization. You may be surprised. It is in the lease for this building that part of its work, the first sentence which is spelling out its work, what all? Political, education, social, education, and the rest of it. So it is a political organization where it is established to enhance the belief and the interests of African Caribbean people, and that is politics, because you're looking out for your self-interest. And what Berry was trying to say to the people back then and up to the last breath he blew in his body was, look, we have to look out for our own interests as African people. We're not going to burn down anywhere, or we're not going to do, but where justice is important, we need to make sure that we get our share of the cake. So the IIOCC began looking out for its interests, and it saw a whole realms of program came through the confines of these buildings. The Saturday school, the training programs, which it's a whole other discussion, whereby there are people in this community and far who are now running their own mechanic building, own TV, because they got training here as apprentices. We have some of the old artifacts with tube, those old turntables still in this building that youngsters usually learn electronics and electronics engineering in this building. Then it came down to the whole realms of play scheme, where, people who were, best word to say, who they wouldn't allow them to integrate in regular nurseries. They formed their own. And at one time, this community has about maybe 30 odd play schemes running at any one time. Play schemes also going back from early 70s. I have written up all about that. And then you look at the whole issue of public education, and that is where I think Berry began to see where, he was best able now to flex his muscles about, here is my chance where I can push through Afrocentrism. So he uses the opportunity to create Culture Week. So long before Black History Month in England, Culture Week, I just found the photographs today. The first Culture Week, 1970, started in this building. And he used it to show that we were no slave, but we were people of high intellect, our contribution to civilization, and use it also as an opportunity for local people who had talent in poetry, dance, drama, speech, everything, to demonstrate the work. And Culture Week has gone to a higher heights, where when it was not even able to deliver some of the aspect of what it could deliver, the Roots Festival, which Mrs. Edwards started, was to solely concentrate mainly on the food of our African people and the fashion aspect of our people. And she can tell you how she was able to get the city council to even buy into the whole notion of sponsoring the different dishes that African people cook, and show them that we have our own cuisine. We don't have to eat what you eat. And that is something which it's a phenomenal contribution. Sadly, her archives is not in this building. It is in Manchester. I have looked at it, the Roots Festival. It's in London, but at some point in time, I think we should make some effort to get it reproduced so we can have it here also. On the back of those programs, one of the seminal contributions of the IIOCC is fighting against racism and the police. There are probably 2 generations of people now living in Manchester who Berry, as a paid worker and as a volunteer, has represented them at tribunals at police stations, at schools, when they did not know how to deal with the authority. Instead of going to a solicitor or the pastor, where did they find Carmore Road? When you look at the volume of cases that he went through to work tribunals, schools, among others, it's volumes we have in this building. A good 20 odd years of it. I have seen names, I have seen photographs of some people who I know very well when they had their issues. Berry was the one who came and represent them. And what was this all about? Just because he knew that, our people must get their share of the pie. So the representation. Then we talk about the whole issue of informal activities whereby people who needed legal help didn't know where to turn. Because Berry was all over the place in terms of education, he was with the domino team, he didn't play cricket but he accompanied them. And all those areas, from what I have read in the photographs, when he was there, they can talk about everything else they want to talk about, but he uses the opportunity to remind them that, here is our history. And that was something which I found him quite good at doing. He had a very easygoing personality of trying to get the politics, mixing everything. We are sitting in the West Indian Centre at Carmore Road, and we are in the Bonsu Reference Library. The West Indian Centre owes a great depth of attitude to Mr. Edwards, firstly as a volunteer. His work and his contribution through the organizational structure, despite all the difficulties, have been tremendous. He has worked extensively for another 8 to 10 years after his retirement and after he was even stopped being paid as the warden for the center, which he was the warden when he went into youth work. So it's a tribute that we have this library in honor of him, because he was about education. He told me that one of his dreams was to have a center where you have a bookshop, a place where educational talks, and a cafe. So when we approached IIOCC to name this library in his honor, when this gift was being made to us, there were no objections to it. So people recognize that, it's good to have his legacy, and particularly through education, continue to live. So it's an honor for us to have this library in his name, which was opened 2 years ago. We also think that continuing the work at the Saturday School is a great reminder of his work and those who have helped him along the path. Mr. Edwards was about liberation, and he was keen on working with people who was about his liberation also. And that's where personally I felt that he was misunderstood from an organizational point of view, as well as from people who knew him individually, that he was radical and he was this and he was unkind and he was anti-system and anti-establishment. I didn't see him in that light. I saw him as those who were interested in Africans' liberation, whether you're on the continent or in the diaspora. And that sums up that he was a true Garveyite, because Garveyism know no geographical boundary. Whether you're a black man, you're an African. And Mr. Edwards summarized that in his work. Back in Guyana, before he crossed border, his mother was a Garveyite, and he himself learned the teaching, and he was attending Garvey meeting. And when he came here, he wasted no time in looking for institutions to push Garvey work through. And the IIOCC allowed him or didn't give him too much difficulty in some respect to push Garveyism, even when it didn't appear it was Garveyism. So I think, in a nutshell, the institution that exists as it's today, it is a Garvey institution, whether you like it or not. And people may not want to hear this, but those who are aware of how Garvey has developed, this is one of the seed which Mr. Edwards has tried to push black liberation struggle, and foremost, build an institution from grassroots level where those who will come after him, like myself and a number of other people, see it fit to continue his work. So we enjoy doing what we are doing through the Pan-African Congress movement, which he has built through the study group here, and Africa Liberation Day Committee, the study group, the Saturday school, and even the library. Sadly, the organization itself has not stepped a level up to see where, they should invest in ensuring that much and so much of what has been done through his leadership in the wider community is being entombed in this building, and people can understand, that it took a leader and a man who see himself as walking beside people to get things done. When we put the timeline up downstairs about him, there were no objection, and in fact, I think people may be asking, why did we choose to put it up there, and there were no meeting call or anything like that. That was one thing that we decided that we wouldn't have a meeting about. It's just like this library. We didn't have a meeting about who we're going to name it after and why. We just said it's named Nana Bonsu Library. And people are still humming and hooing that Mr. Edwards do this and Mr. Edwards do that, and he never do that. But deep down, those who know, and lot of the contribution this place has made is not only true because he was a paid personnel, but his voluntary work and his vision for black people and African people here in Manchester and across the UK and even across the world was something that he was passionate about. And he would continue to say that, that he thinks he is doing something that others will follow. And I think he had succeeded when I look back at what we have gone through over the last 10 years at the IOCC, funding, the membership has gotten older, difficulty in attracting younger people. But the building stands. The most significant program, which I think, continues to do well, is the Saturday school is going strong and is getting better. Kwanzaa continue to resonate through people's memory. If nothing else happens in Manchester, New Year's Day, they are looking towards Kwanzaa. And finally, I think the generations who have benefited from the work from IOCC, either through youth work, representational tribunals, school representation, grassroots education, the culture weave, you name it, still remember him. And I think I would want to say that as a true Pan-Africanist, he has lived fully in a European setting what Marcus Garvey asks for, that, you're to make sure that the liberation struggle continues wherever you are. And you must always build institutions, and he was always about building institutions, and he has contributed significantly in building the IOCC.